Ben returns to his childhood home in Springfield, Missouri, only to find a bright orange HOA violation notice stapled to his grandpa's wooden fence. The breeze rustled leaves across the cracked sidewalk as Ben stepped out of his aging sedan, suitcase in one hand, a bag of groceries tucked under his arm. The house looked just as he remembered, faded green shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the wind, and the unmistakable scent of maple trees dropping their last bursts of color. But it wasn't nostalgia that caught his eye. It was the garish orange paper, fluttering like a flag of warning on the old cedar fence. He squinted at it. Notice of violation. Structure exceeds height limits per revised HOA Code 7.4. Fine, $500 per week effective immediately. Well, that's new, he muttered. From the porch, Grandpa Walter sat bundled in a navy cardigan, sipping iced tea from a cloudy mason jar. His blue eyes tracked Ben's movements like a hawk. Built that fence with my own hands in '65, he said, almost to himself. She don't know the half of it. Ben peeled the paper from the fence post and held it up. You know anything about this Tracy Bell? Grandpa's lips tightened. That woman's been itchin' to make noise since she got the president's chair. Never had the decency to say hello. Ben set his bags by the door and walked up the steps. $500 a week? For a fence that's been here since before moon landings? She's not after the fence, Grandpa said, eyes distant. She's after control. They sat side by side on the swing, watching the neighborhood as the breeze nudged pumpkins off porches and swirled leaves into lazy spirals. Hank the mailman strolled by, whistling a Sinatra tune. He raised a hand. Afternoon, Walter. And you must be Ben, heard you were comin' back, Hank said, slipping envelopes into the box. Just got in, Ben replied. Apparently in time for a fine. Hank chuckled. HOA's been swingin' their weight lately. You ask me, some folks enjoy writin' up trouble. Ben tucked the notice into his jacket pocket. Well, she picked the wrong fence this time. Grandpa gave a rare grin. Got more history in this wood than she's got in her rulebook. Later that evening, they walked down the block to the community center for the monthly HOA town hall. A handful of residents milled about in folding chairs, sipping coffee from white styrofoam cups. At the front stood Tracy Bell, early 50s, prim navy blazer, clipboard in hand. She didn't smile when she spoke. As of last month, structural compliance is under immediate enforcement, she stated, tone clipped. No exceptions. Uniformity maintains value. Questions? Ben raised a hand. Is there an appeal process? My grandfather. Rules apply to everyone, even him, she said, not looking up from her notes, pointing with the back end of a pen in Grandpa's direction. The room shifted. Conversations quieted. Grandpa said nothing, but Ben saw the way his jaw tightened. Back at the house, the porch light flickered as they stepped into the garage. It smelled of motor oil, cedar chips, and thyme. Grandpa leaned against the workbench, rubbing his thumb along a dent in the wood. She talks about rules like she invented them, Ben said, opening cabinets stacked with brittle instruction manuals and dusty screw jars. You ever keep records from the early days? Grandpa hesitated, then nodded toward the far corner. Look behind the mower. Old cardboard box. Might be something there. Ben crouched, pushed aside a paint can, and slid the box into the light. It was heavy with age, tied shut with a string now faded gray. On the top, written in blocky black ink. HOA 1965, Charter and Letters. Inside the box, Ben finds typewritten HOA bylaws signed by 14 neighbors, including Walter Carter. He set the old cardboard box on the worn coffee table, careful not to spill the yellowed papers stacked within. The living room glowed with the soft light of a table lamp, casting gentle shadows over framed photographs of family reunions, fishing trips, and one black and white image of Grandpa Walter standing proudly beside the very same fence, hammer in hand. Ben reached in and pulled out the top document, a thick, brittle packet with Springfield Meadows Homeowners Association, Charter and Bylaws, 1965, typed across the front. It smelled faintly of dust and aged ink. As he flipped through, he noticed the neat, precise signatures at the back, 14 names. The first was Walter J. Carter. "Grandpa," Ben glanced up, eyes wide. "You were the first to sign this." Walter nodded, easing back into his recliner with a quiet grunt. "That was a different time. We all just wanted the potholes filled and the streetlights fixed." Ben traced a line on the second page. "This clause, original structural elements constructed before charter enactment shall be exempt from future compliance updates. That fence qualifies, doesn't it?" Walter gave a dry chuckle. "Your grandma made me build that fence straight during a tornado warning. She wouldn't let weather mess up her backyard tea parties." Outside, a gentle rain began tapping against the window panes. The wind whooshed through the gutters, but inside it was warm, soft plaid blanket draped over the couch, a quiet hum from the old radio playing Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman. Ben settled cross-legged on the floor, scanning each page with his phone. He opened his laptop and pulled up the current HOA bylaws, PDF format, sleek font, cold tone. The 1965 original was full of neighborly language, in the interest of harmony and as agreed upon by members with good faith. "She came in 5 years ago," Walter said, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Started with mailbox color, then tree heights. Tracy pushed through new codes like it was the Senate." Ben glanced up. "You never pushed back?" Walter sighed. "She'd outvote us before we could speak. Most the old-timers stopped showing up. She knew exactly when to take over." A sudden knock interrupted the quiet. Ben peeked through the blinds. A little boy in a red firefighter costume stood with a plastic pumpkin bucket, blinking at the porch light. Walter opened the door with a smile. "You're a bit late, young man." The boy grinned. "My mom says I had to brush my teeth first." Walter dropped 2 butterscotch candies into his bucket. "Smart mom." Back inside, Ben continued scrolling through scanned pages. One sheet caught his eye, slightly askew in the stack, stapled at the corner. "Walter, look at this, Founders Clause 812, no changes to code may invalidate founding agreements without unanimous legacy consent." He paused. "Mr. Santiago's name is here too. You said he still lives down on Jasper Street?" Walter nodded. "Has a bad hip, but his memory's sharp as a tack." Ben leaned back, rubbing his temples. "If this clause is valid, we've got ground to stand on. Especially if Tracy changed codes without consulting original members, or their successors." He turned to the final page of the charter, eyebrows rising. "Wait, this signature. Joseph Bell." Walter sat up straighter. "That's her father." Ben stared at the name for a moment before whispering, "She's breaking her own family's rules." Just then, the laptop chimed. A new email popped up on the screen with the subject line in bold. "Final hearing scheduled, attendance mandatory. Ben takes Grandpa to Mildred's diner, hoping to gather local insights, but ends up starting a neighborhood whisper campaign." The bell above the door gave a cheerful jingle as Ben held it open for Grandpa, who ambled in with his usual deliberate gait. Mildred's diner smelled like crisp bacon, overbrewed coffee, and maple syrup sunk into Formica tabletops. The booths were upholstered in cracked red vinyl, and every other table seemed to host someone who greeted Walter by name. "Morning, sugar," called Linda the waitress, her name tag hanging slightly crooked on her sunflower print blouse. She carried a pot of coffee like it was an extension of her arm. "Well now, haven't seen you two in a pair before. Sit anywhere, hon." They chose a booth by the window, sunbeams slanting across faded photographs of high school football teams and pie-eating contests from decades past. Linda came over, topped off their mugs without asking. "So what's the occasion?" she asked. "Fence got a fine," Ben replied, sliding into the booth. Linda whistled. "That woman issues more fines than Springfield PD," she said, pouring a splash of cream into Grandpa's cup without needing to ask. "Who, Tracy?" asked Mrs. Wilson, leaning from the next booth. She wore a bright blue visor and sipped tea with lemon. Last week she ticketed the Jenkinses 4 unsightly pumpkins. Imagine that, after Halloween, no less. Ben leaned in slightly. Didn't the old HOA have different rules? Like grandfather clauses or something? Mrs. Wilson nodded. Oh yes. I remember something about original structures being exempt. That fence of your grandfather's is older than most marriages on this street. Grandpa stirred his coffee. A tornado warning didn't stop your grandma from insisting it be 6 boards high. That ought to count for something. Ben chuckled, then turned serious. She's rewriting the rules. Skipping votes, ignoring legacy clauses. From the door, Hank the mailman stepped in, brushing the cold off his coat. You talkin' HOA? He said, plopping onto a counter stool. She cited me for painting my mailbox flag the wrong shade of red. Said it violated visual harmony. Mrs. Wilson rolled her eyes. Visual harmony, my foot. It's a flag, not a Monet. After breakfast, Linda brought over 2 slices of lemon meringue pie. On the house, she said with a wink. Rebellion needs fuel. Back at home, the porch felt cooler under the overcast sky. Grandpa settled into the swing, blanket over his knees. Ben stood at the railing, his phone buzzing softly in his pocket. Looks like the neighborhood grapevine's ripe, he said, scrolling. People are texting, heard you're looking into the HOA stuff? One guy wants to see the original charter. Careful, boy, Grandpa murmured. Small towns remember everything. Ben spent the afternoon making digital copies of the 1965 documents, highlighting the Founders Clause and the exemption paragraphs. He emailed them to a few neighbors he trusted, Mrs. Wilson, the Jenkinses, even Hank. Then, he opened the Springfield Meadows Community Facebook group and typed out a quote from the old bylaws. No amendment shall invalidate original structures built prior to 1965 charter establishment. He hit post. Within the hour, reactions began flooding in, likes, heart emojis, comments like wait, what, and is this legit, and Tracy's gonna blow a gasket. By nightfall, the post had been shared 17 times. A few folks messaged Ben directly, asking if there would be a meeting. One simply wrote, "Thank you." Ben sat on the porch, phone warm in his hand, listening to the creak of the swing and the distant rustle of leaves. Grandpa said nothing, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Then came the notification. Tracy Bell had commented on the post. This is being monitored. HOA guidelines are current and enforceable. See you at the hearing. Ben arrives early at the HOA hearing, binder in hand, only to be told public comments will be limited to 60 seconds per household. The parking lot was already half full when Ben pulled in, the autumn light slipping beneath the horizon in soft streaks of pink and orange. He stepped out, clutching the thick black binder against his chest like a shield. The documents inside, scanned originals, typed summaries, and handwritten notes, rattled slightly with each step. The air smelled of fallen leaves and the faint tang of burnt coffee. Inside, the clubhouse hummed with artificial light. Rows of gray folding chairs faced a long table where the board sat slightly elevated, flanked by a flag and a potted fern that had seen better days. At the back, a cookie tray held remnants of oatmeal raisin and a few broken sugar cookies. A sign-in sheet sat at the entrance beside a stack of pre-printed comment slips. Ben approached the table and scribbled his name. 60 seconds, said a woman in a cranberry blouse behind the desk, without looking up. Ben blinked. Excuse me? Public comment. 1 minute per household. Standard practice. She tapped her pen on the clipboard as if to finalize the statement. He took a seat near the front, Grandpa beside him in his usual flannel and jeans, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Around them, neighbors trickled in, Mrs. Wilson in her vintage floral scarf, Hank the mailman in his off-duty windbreaker. Whispered greetings passed through the room, but everyone kept their eyes on the board. Tracy Bell sat at the center, posture perfectly upright, a navy blazer hugging her shoulders like armor. She adjusted the mic. Good evening. I now call the November hearing to order. In the interest of time, Comments from the floor will be limited to 1 minute per residence. Please refrain from interruptions. Ben stood when his name was called. I have in front of me the original 1965 charter signed by 14 founding members. Tracy held up a hand. Mr. Carter, we've reviewed those documents. They are obsolete and, frankly, unsigned in any way that holds legal authority. He held up the binder. They are signed. Including your father's name. A murmur rippled through the room. Obsolete, she repeated. Codes have evolved. This meeting is to confirm enforcement. Grandpa shifted beside him, then stood. Excuse me, he said, voice firm but low. Tracy's gavel hit the table with a loud crack. Sir, you are not recognized to speak. Ben bristled. He's a founding member. Founding titles do not grant special privileges. Mrs. Wilson rose, cane in one hand. I was there, too. I remember the original meetings. We voted on everything, even the color of the cookie tablecloths. Tracy's smile didn't reach her eyes. This is not a forum for nostalgia. A few scattered laughs from the board. David and Eric looked down at their notes, avoiding eye contact. Ben slid his phone from his pocket, hitting record. He rested it on his lap beneath a folded napkin. I'd like to submit a motion for review, he said. There will be no motions tonight. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, pockets of conversation bubbling up. Hank leaned toward Mrs. Wilson. You hear this? Every word, she muttered. Tracy cleared her throat. Let the record show that the Carter residence remains non-compliant. Per Section 12.7, removal of the offending structure is scheduled for next Thursday, by order of the board. A gasp came from someone near the back. Grandpa didn't move. Ben clenched his jaw. You mean you're tearing it down? Tracy tapped the gavel again. Meeting adjourned. As the chairs scraped against linoleum and neighbors whispered in tight clusters, Ben turned to his grandfather, the binder still clutched in his hand. Grandpa leaned in close, eyes sharp, voice barely above a breath. Then I guess it's time she meets the founders. Ben and Grandpa attend the neighborhood's fall potluck, and find unexpected allies. The golden hour painted Briarwood Park in warm strokes of amber, the kind that softened everything and made memories seem sweeter than they probably were. Folding tables stretched across the grass, dressed in checkered cloths fluttering gently in the breeze. Steam lifted from crockpots and foil-covered trays, mixing with the sharp scent of cinnamon, barbecue, and something unmistakably Midwestern, green bean casserole, if Ben had to guess. Grandpa shuffled beside him, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. Haven't seen this many crockpots since your grandma's church auction in '92. Ben smiled, but his eyes were scanning the crowd, neighbors laughing in tight clusters, kids darting between legs playing tag, and somewhere near the end of the dessert table, the unmistakable sight of Mrs. Wilson balancing a massive apple pie like a trophy. Evening, Walter, she called, her scarf billowing like a flag. I brought your favorite, no nutmeg, just how Rose used to make it. Grandpa tipped an imaginary hat. You spoil me. Ben drifted toward a picnic bench, easing the manila folder from beneath his jacket. He didn't display it openly, not yet, but as people wandered over with plates and polite questions, he began sliding a sheet or two out at a time. You remember these? He asked Mrs. Wilson, showing her a copy of the 1965 founding bylaws. She squinted, read for a moment, and then her eyes widened. Mercy, is that Joe Santiago's signature? Funny you should mention that, came a voice behind them. Mr. Santiago approached, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane, but with a gleam in his eye that had not dulled with age. Joe, Grandpa said, shaking his hand firmly. Thought I'd keep my word, Santiago replied. You said there'd be pie. And bylaws, Ben added with a smirk. Mr. Santiago scanned the paper slowly, lips moving as he read. He tapped a yellowed line near the bottom. This clause here, original structures erected prior to HOA ratification shall remain valid. We added that to protect our porches and sheds from future nonsense. Ben nodded. They're trying to fine Grandpa over that fence. $500 a week. Santiago muttered something in Spanish and shook his head. That clause still stands. Unless repealed by full vote. Word must have spread faster than Ben realized. Before long, neighbors were approaching in pairs, then threes. Hank the mailman appeared with a crock of chili and a conspiratorial grin. Look at you, Hank said, clapping Ben on the shoulder. You want change? Start with warm pie and warm stories. Margaret from the corner house pulled Ben aside. Tracy said our wind chimes violated the decibel code. My husband's hearing aid barely works. Even the twins' dad chimed in between chasing his kids. She fined us for sidewalk chalk. Stories poured out like coffee from an overused carafe. Ben listened, nodded, handed out copied pages of the charter. Some neighbors signed the back in solidarity, while others offered phone numbers, stories, or homemade cookies wrapped in napkins. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the Bluetooth speaker near the drink station played Sinatra's "Fly Me to the Moon," followed by Patsy Cline crooning about being crazy. Laughter bubbled from one end of the field to the other. Grandpa stood, clearing his throat. We didn't start the HOA to punish each other. It was a Saturday morning handshake sort of thing, mend fences, not tear them down. Fix potholes, not fine mailboxes. Rose made bundt cakes, I patched driveways. That was the spirit. Hank stepped forward, lifting a pen. We can petition for a special board vote under Article 7. 20 signatures minimum. Ben opened a clean sheet on a clipboard. I've got 22. As the last rays of daylight gave way to string lights draped from the trees, Ben felt a flicker of something he hadn't known he missed: belonging. The kind that didn't come with dues or newsletters. He was packing up the folder when his phone buzzed. A notification blinked across the screen. Tracy Bell posted on the HOA website. Unauthorized gathering tonight is not sanctioned. Legal counsel being contacted. Rain patters softly outside as Ben pores over the last folder in the binder, and discovers the missing signature page. The night had curled tightly around the house, wrapping it in the kind of chill that made fireplaces necessary and blankets feel earned. Inside Grandpa's living room, the soft hiss of rain wove into the crackle of the fireplace. A record spun lazily on the player, some old jazz piece that Ben didn't recognize but found oddly soothing. He sat cross-legged on the floor with the binder open in front of him like a sacred tome, every plastic sleeve reflecting flickers of firelight. Been through this thing 3 times, Ben muttered, turning another page. Grandpa shifted in his recliner, arms tucked under a flannel throw. Some things get lost in plain sight, he said, not looking up from his mug of chamomile tea. Ben paused. Mrs. Wilson had said the same thing once, and it hadn't meant much then. But now. He unhooked the binder's last divider, feeling behind it with careful fingers. Something crinkled. A slight resistance, then the faint rasp of paper being pulled free. Tucked against the backboard was a yellowed envelope, sealed with a brittle sticker that had long since stopped sticking. Ben opened it slowly. There it was. The original signature page, complete with 14 names in blue and black ink, some faded but legible. And beneath it, clipped with a rusty staple, a separate single-sheet amendment titled Addendum, March 1974. Signed again, by most of the same names, including one marked clearly, Raymond Bell. Ben stared at the signature for a moment, his heart thudding like the tick of Grandpa's mantel clock. That's Tracy's father, he said. Grandpa set his mug down. He was young back then. Took minutes at the meetings, but he signed what mattered. And this, Ben said, lifting the amendment carefully, explicitly references the original structure clause. No new regulation shall override protections granted prior to June 1965. It's crystal clear. Crystal to you, Grandpa said, but Tracy'll pretend it's fogged glass. Ben wasn't listening anymore. He'd risen and begun scanning the documents with his phone's app, sliding each one into a digital folder he'd labeled HOA Originals. He cross-referenced the names, dates, and typed up annotations for each clause that had a modern conflict. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, wind swept a few dry leaves across the driveway. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ben hesitated, then answered. Hello? The voice was low, a little anxious. Ben Carter? Yes. This is Eric. From the HOA board. Ben stood still, a finger pressed to his laptop's trackpad. I'm not calling officially, Eric said quickly. This is off the record. Okay. I saw your post, the 1965 stuff. And now I've seen the potluck signers, too. I think you're right. Ben sat down slowly. You do? But this is bigger than you know, Eric said. Some of us were pressured. Tracy's been saying the charter was incomplete, that it was symbolic. But, that amendment? If you really have it. I do. Then you need to present it. All of it. Full documentation. No fluff. We're working on it, Ben said. You'll get a full packet. Eric's voice dropped even lower. Just, be careful. Tracy's not used to losing. The line clicked off. Ben sat there, staring at the call-ended screen, then looked over at Grandpa, who had watched the entire exchange silently. I'm making a presentation, Ben said. Title, The Original Charter, Forgotten or Ignored. Grandpa gave a slow nod. Then, to Ben's surprise, he smiled, a real smile, crooked but warm. Didn't think we'd ever need that page again, he said, settling deeper into the chair. Ben stayed up late that night. Each document was scanned, annotated, and arranged in order. Footnotes cited the founding members. Highlights marked the clauses Tracy had broken. At the top of the packet's cover page, he typed in bold, Community First, a return to purpose. He had just finished stapling the final printed copy when another email alert pinged on his screen. Subject line, Special Vote Approved for next Tuesday. Public attendance encouraged. On a brisk Tuesday evening, every folding chair in the HOA clubhouse is filled, neighbors line the walls, murmuring. The air in the clubhouse was warmer than expected, thick with layers of wool coats, thermoses of coffee clutched tight in mittened hands, and the occasional rustle of a printed agenda. A cold wind swept past the tall windows, rattling the glass and reminding everyone inside why they'd come early to claim a seat. Some leaned against the walls, others stood in the back, whispering to neighbors they hadn't spoken to in years. Eric cleared his throat at the podium. Let's bring this meeting to order, he said, voice a touch steadier than usual. His tie was crooked, and the clipboard in his hand trembled slightly. This is a special session under Article 7 of the Charter. Public comments are allowed. Before Tracy could fully slide into the lead chair beside him, Ben stepped forward. He held the thick binder close to his chest, its corners frayed, papers bulging from its sides like eager witnesses. I'd like to speak, Ben said, his voice louder than intended. Tracy frowned, adjusting her scarf as if that would somehow restore order. As a reminder, only property owners have. He's speaking on my behalf, Grandpa said from the front row, his voice calm but unwavering. Eric glanced at the binder, then at the crowd, then nodded. Proceed. Ben placed the binder on the folding table like a sacred object, flipping it open. This, he said, tapping the first page, is the original HOA charter from 1965. Signed by 14 founding members. Including Walter Carter, my grandfather. Including Raymond Bell, Tracy's father. Gasps and rustles spread through the room. He pulled out another document. And this is the 1974 amendment. It explicitly states that any new regulations shall not override protections for structures existing before June 1965. That includes the Carter fence. Tracy shifted in her seat. Those documents are not official. They were never filed. Ben didn't flinch. They were signed. And scanned. And confirmed by Mr. Santiago, who was there. He nodded toward the second row, where Santiago stood. I remember signing that amendment, Santiago said. Raymond insisted it be added. Said we should protect what we built. Murmurs of agreement rolled through the room like a soft tide. Grandpa stood slowly. This HOA wasn't made to fine people into fear, he said, steady on his cane. It was built so folks could borrow sugar, watch each other's homes during holidays, and fix fences together. Not to punish each other over paint shades or mailbox flags. Heads nodded. Mrs. Wilson dabbed her eyes, then stood. My late husband and I hosted the first potluck in our yard. No permission forms, no permits. Just casseroles and kindness. Tracy slapped her pen down. This is a nostalgia parade. None of this changes the present-day charter. These people are misinformed, grasping at the past like it means something. A hush fell. David, one of the quieter board members, raised his hand. Actually, it does mean something, he said. Article 7 gives us the authority to call for a vote of no confidence in the board president, should a significant portion of residents express concern. He looked out at the room. I believe we've reached that point. Eric stepped forward, clipboard in hand. All board members, please cast your vote. Majority rules. There was a pause. Then Angela, never one to speak much, raised her hand. Remove. David followed. Remove. Eric nodded. Remove. The fourth member, Marcia, sighed. Remove. Tracy's jaw clenched. Stay, she said, voice like ice breaking. But it didn't matter. The board votes 4-1, Eric said. Tracy Bell is hereby removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. There was a breathless moment, then a wave of applause rolled through the room, slow at first, then thunderous. Ben saw neighbors turning to each other, some embracing, others wiping their eyes, as if a heavy fog had lifted. Tracy stood, fuming. I'll sue every one of you, she snarls. Grandpa rises, and I'll take the stand first, ma'am. Thanksgiving morning dawns quiet. The wooden fence stands, now gleaming with fresh varnish. The early sun stretched across the Carter yard, warming the frosty grass and catching flecks of gold in the freshly sealed planks. Ben stepped back to admire the work, his breath curling in the cool air. A small bronze plaque gleamed where the gate latched, Legacy Fence, established 1965. He gave it a gentle pat, as though sealing something sacred into the wood. Inside the house, the scent of cinnamon and roasted pecans floated from the oven, while Grandpa fiddled with the radio in the living room, coaxing it toward a static-free tune of Johnny Cash. On the porch, Ben laid out 2 old folding chairs, their arms worn smooth by time and sun. The porch had been swept, the steps newly painted, modest repairs, but they gave the place a quiet dignity. By mid-morning, the first knock came. Mrs. Wilson, bundled in her pea coat and paisley scarf, stood smiling with a turkey in one arm and a foil-covered casserole in the other. Hope you boys are hungry, she said, brushing a leaf off the porch rail. Birds still warm. Behind her came Hank, whistling a low tune, balancing a crockpot of chili on one hip. Don't let that woman fool you, he said. Her turkey beats mine every year. But this chili? Secret recipe. Is that so? Grandpa stepped out with a wink. You said the same thing about your meatloaf in '97, and I still remember chewing it in '99. Laughter floated up to the eaves. Ben took the dishes, led everyone into the warm kitchen, where pies and sides began to form a colorful mosaic on the counter. Each new knock brought more food, more laughter, more people. A young couple with a toddler and a baby in matching knit hats arrived with cornbread and hesitant smiles. We just moved in on Elm Street, the man said, adjusting his son's mitten. Heard this is the place to be. Ben offered a handshake. You heard right. The couple stepped inside, their little one tugging at Mrs. Wilson's scarf with fascination. Outside, Grandpa lingered on the porch, watching as new cars pulled up, doors opened, and more of the neighborhood filtered in. He lit his pipe, just for the scent, and sat in one of the old chairs, letting the sunlight warm his knees. Ben joined him, holding 2 mugs of cider. He passed one over. They came, Grandpa said quietly. Even after all that mess. They didn't come for the food, Ben said. They came because they remembered why this street matters. Grandpa nodded slowly, eyes on the fence. You varnished it just like I showed you. Ben smiled. 2 coats. Even got the spots underneath. They sat a while, sipping and watching. A few kids started tossing leaves, their laughter ringing like wind chimes. On the lawn, the young couple returned, now crouched near the rose bushes, pointing and discussing something. Think they'll plant there? Grandpa asked. Probably, Ben said. She said she always wanted a garden. Asked if she could dig next to the fence line. Good, Grandpa murmured. That spot needs new life. From inside came bursts of chatter, Hank arguing chili technique, Mrs. Wilson recounting a storm from '88 that blew her porch swing clear into the miller's yard. It was a tapestry of voices, old and new, threaded by memory and casseroles. Ben reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring of brass keys. He turned to Grandpa. Here, he said. I think these belong to you. But Grandpa shook his head. No, son. They belong to you now. Ben turned the keys over in his hand, the same ones that had locked the old HOA chest for decades. A symbol of leadership, yes, but something else too, trust. Inside the house, someone cranked up the record player. Sinatra's voice poured out into the porch, warm and golden. Grandpa closed his eyes for a moment, humming along. You did good, he said softly. Ben leaned back in his chair, fingers wrapped around the cider mug. He watched the wind ripple through the trees, stirring the last few golden leaves, and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief. Not pride. Something deeper. Around him, the town was still itself, quirky, imperfect, full of too many opinions and too many casserole dishes. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like home. Some fences don't divide. They remind. On a quiet street in Missouri, a simple wooden fence weathered storms, seasons, and finally, unjust rules. What began as one man's return home grew into a neighborhood's rediscovery of unity and purpose. The true power of a community isn't found in bylaws or gavel strikes, but in casseroles shared, memories preserved, and voices raised together. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. And sometimes, the strongest walls aren't built to divide, but to remind us where we started, and what we're willing to protect.